Back in 1960, Nintendo started their own taxi service, strange as it might sound, for just a few months. But if you look on Nintendo's website, this taxi company isn't mentioned anywhere. However, we can still find information about this strange time in Nintendo's history if we read interviews with employees who worked at the company and read through books written by some experts on Nintendo's history. So, why on earth did Nintendo start running taxis? And how did it all go so wrong? Let's talk about one of the most forgotten chapters from Nintendo's history, when Nintendo ran a taxi company. Before we get to taxis, we first need to go way back to when Nintendo was first founded. I promise this is relevant. The history of Nintendo is intertwined with the history of a Japanese card game called Hanafuda. For many centuries, Hanafuda was banned in Japan. It was illegal to own these Hanafuda cards. But then, in the late 1800s, Japanese authorities finally lifted the Hanafuda ban. And taking advantage of this, a craftsman called Fusajiro Yamauchi founded a company which produced handmade Hanafuda cards. The name of the company was Nintendo. Nowadays, nobody knows what the word Nintendo actually means, including Nintendo themselves. Over the years, the most prominent theory has become leave luck to the heavens. But I cannot emphasize enough, that is just a theory. So, throughout the 1800s, Nintendo kept making these Hanafuda cards, and in the early 1900s, they even expanded into producing playing cards. The company hoped they'd be able to export these cards internationally, but to Nintendo's surprise, their playing cards proved really successful in Japan alone. So that was the state of the company when a man named Hiroshi Yamauchi took over in 1950. Nintendo was Japan's biggest playing card manufacturer. Over the next decade, he partnered with Disney to produce Disney playing cards for Japan, and Nintendo even became the first company in the world to make plastic playing cards. Hiroshi Yamauchi was doing everything he could to keep growing Nintendo's empire. But in 1963, something happened which changed the way he saw playing cards forever. Hiroshi Yamauchi traveled to the US to visit the United States Playing Card Company, which was not only America's but the world's biggest playing card manufacturer. He expected to see a huge factory with swanky, expensive-looking offices, but instead, what he saw was really disappointing. The offices of the world's biggest playing card manufacturer? Well, they weren't much bigger than Nintendo's. Clearly, the world of playing cards was a lot smaller than Yamauchi had thought. And so, he decided to find a new business for Nintendo to enter, something much bigger than boring old playing cards. And that leads into perhaps the strangest era of Nintendo's history, when company president Hiroshi Yamauchi started trying out all kinds of unique and bizarre business ventures. And that is what sets the scene for Nintendo's taxi business. So, let's talk taxis. As I said earlier, there are very few sources of information when it comes to this chapter of Nintendo's history, but one of the best that does exist is a book called The History of Nintendo, Volume 1. There's a few books in the series, but the first volume covers the very early history of Nintendo. It was written by two Nintendo experts, Florent Gorge and Isao Yamazaki, and Yamazaki has even worked with Nintendo before. In other words, these two know what they're talking about. According to their book, in 1960, Hiroshi Yamauchi decided on the next path for Nintendo to take. They would set up a taxi company. Why taxis? Well, one of Hiroshi Yamauchi's relatives also ran a taxi business, so the president of Nintendo decided to follow suit. And so, in October of 1960, Daya Taxi was founded by Nintendo. The word Daya means diamond in Japanese, so the company name translates to Diamond Taxi in English. And with a diamond from a deck of cards as their logo, this brand name seemed to pay homage to Nintendo's history of playing card making. And within the first few months of operation, Dire Taxi seemed to be doing really well, with a fleet of 40 vehicles at one point. So what happened? Well, just months after the company was launched, things started going downhill. And the cause of that was the Taxi Drivers Union. You see, Hiroshi Yamauchi was, by all accounts, not a very friendly man. He was infamous for his fiery temper, in fact. And when the Taxi Drivers Union came to Nintendo asking for a raise, a pretty major clash took place between Nintendo and the drivers. And you can't run a taxi company without any taxi drivers. So, only a few months after Dire Taxi launched, Nintendo sold all their shares and bid farewell to taxis. This taxi disaster was one of a number of failures for Yamauchi within just a few years, and he was quoted as saying at the time, "Everything I tried failed." But Dire Taxi was not a failure. In fact, it's still around in one form or another to this very day. You see, when Nintendo left the taxi business, they sold Dire Taxi to a company called the Meitetsu Group, which is one of Japan's biggest transport companies, running trains, cars, buses and taxis across Japan. After buying Dire Taxi, the Meitetsu Group gave the company a new name, Kyoto Meitetsu Taxi, marking the beginning of a long era of success for the company. Kyoto Meitetsu Taxi stuck around from the 1960s all the way up to 2004, when the Meitetsu Group decided to sell Nintendo's former taxi business. The new owners were another Japanese transport group called Yasuka Transportation, and Yasuka also gave the taxi company a new name, Minami Yasuka Transportation. Minami is just the part of Japan where this taxi company was based. And Minami Yasuka Transportation is still around to this day. If you go to Minami Yasuka Transportation's website, it even lists the company as having been set up on the 17th of October 1960, the exact day that Nintendo first set up Dire Taxi. There's also photos of the taxi headquarters and even a phone number in case, you want to call a taxi. But what happened on the Nintendo side of things? Well, even after Nintendo sold their shares in Dire Taxi, they kept some of the actual taxi cars themselves. Because in 1971, about 10 years after Nintendo left the taxi business, one of these old taxis was repainted in bright blue and used during the wedding of a Nintendo employee. It's not known how many other of these taxis Nintendo kept after they abandoned the taxi business, but it's interesting to see that they kept any of them. Of course, the taxis didn't look like this back in 1960. Unfortunately, there's no photographs of Nintendo's taxis during their actual months of operation. But if you look closely at the signboard outside the headquarters of Minami Yasuka Transportation, you can see a diamond shape left on the building. And that diamond used to be the logo of Dire Taxi. It's one of the last traces left from when Nintendo ran their Dire Taxi business. Now, you might assume that after becoming one of the biggest game companies on the planet, Nintendo would have just forgotten this strange chapter from their history. I mean, as I said at the start of the video, there's no mention of Dire Taxi on Nintendo's website. But after looking through a bunch of their games, I did find one tiny little reference to Dire Taxi, or at least it might be a reference. It's from the WarioWare games. You see, the WarioWare series is set in a place called Diamond City, and you might be able to see where I'm going with this. Because this city has a taxi company, and the name of the company is Diamond Taxi, the exact English translation of Nintendo's real-world taxi business from 1960. Was this an intentional reference? I'm honestly not sure. It's interesting to note that the first game featuring Diamond Taxi was released in 2003, exactly 1 year after Hiroshi Yamauchi stepped down from his position as the president of Nintendo. So, perhaps it was a complete coincidence. There's no way of knowing. But if it was just a coincidence, I still like the fact that Nintendo's taxi business still lives on in one tiny way after Nintendo moved on from taxis to video games. Hey, thanks so much for watching. This was a pretty complex topic to research. As I said, there wasn't a lot of information out there. But digging up obscure stories from Nintendo's history is what I like to do. So, subscribe to see more videos like this every week. And I'll see you next time. Bye!